For the past 40 years, we've lived by a single promise. The world would be flat, goods would flow freely, and borders would be mere lines on a map. But look closer. The once smoothly running machine of globalization is now stalling and turning in the opposite direction. Why are factories leaving the world's factory? Why are nations suddenly erecting new economic walls? We are entering an era of chaos, where the global dream is crumbling to make way for a far harsher reality. Are you ready for this great reversal? Follow this analysis to understand better. The camera opens on a high-altitude drone shot of a massive container ship, a steel leviathan cutting through the obsidian waters of the Pacific, its deck stacked high with thousands of colorful boxes. For nearly half a century, this image represented the pinnacle of human achievement, a relentless, frictionless flow of goods, capital, and labor that promised to unite the planet in a single, efficient marketplace. We begin with a quiet, unsettling realization. The gears of this great machine are beginning to grind, stutter, and reverse. This is the Great Reversal, the systematic dismantling of the globalized order that defined the late 20th century. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the guiding orthodoxy was that economic integration would lead to permanent peace and shared prosperity. But as the sun sets over the hollowed-out industrial heartlands of the West and the fortified technology hubs of the East, a new and colder reality is emerging. We are witnessing the end of an era of abundance, fueled by cheap offshore labor and just-in-time logistics. In its place, the world is fracturing into competing blocks driven by a desperate scramble for security over efficiency. Geopolitical fragmentation is no longer a theoretical risk. It is the new baseline. From the weaponization of the US dollar to the high-tech Iron Curtain descending around semiconductor supply chains, the architecture of our global civilization is being rewritten in real time. This documentary explores the invisible forces pulling the world apart, a process that is not a sudden crash, but a slow, tectonic shift that will touch every grocery bill, every retirement account, and every sense of stability we once took for granted. The great integration is over. The era of the fortress has begun. The promise of a borderless world has met the hard reality of resource nationalism and strategic overstretch. As the global supply chains that once linked us are nationalized and technological diversification splits the internet into competing ecosystems, the individual is left to navigate a landscape where the rules of the game have been discarded. The efficiency that brought us low-cost goods is being traded for the resilience required to survive a fractured world. This is not just an economic transition. It is a fundamental reconfiguration of how we live, work, and perceive our place in a world that is no longer one, but many. The cracks in the foundation are no longer invisible. In the early weeks of 2026, the signs of a systemic reversal have moved from the periphery of the market to the center of the American household. We see it in the sticky nature of inflation, which refuses to descend towards central bank targets despite aggressive rate hikes. Driven by a 17% surge in average tariff rates that has effectively taxed every imported component of modern life. Economic indicators are flashing red as global growth projections are downgraded to a subdued 2.6%, and manufacturing output in advanced economies hits its lowest level since 2009. The sign of crisis is the sudden structural increase in the cost of resilience. We see it in the volatility of the rupee and the peso, as emerging markets struggle with a 40% year-on-year rise in container shipping costs and the weaponization of trade through over 3,000 new industrial policy measures implemented in a single year. In the United States, the crisis manifests as a bifurcated reality. While high-income households are buoyed by AI-driven asset gains, lower-income families are being crushed by an affordability crisis, where the price of energy and basic goods is no longer governed by efficiency, but by the friction of new trade barriers. This is the stage of structural volatility, where business leaders no longer forecast disruptions, but redesign their entire operating models to function under a state of permanent uncertainty. The cheap, globalized peace has been replaced by a geo-economic posture, where every transaction is scrutinized for its impact on national security, and every consumer choice carries the hidden weight of a world pulling itself apart. The mechanisms of this economic shock are rooted in a fundamental reversal of the efficiency-first doctrine that governed the world for 40 years. In the old regime, any disruption in one part of the world was absorbed by a vast, frictionless global market. Today, that same connectivity acts as a conductor for contagion, amplified by the nationalization of supply chains. When a nation nearshores its production to avoid geopolitical risk, it inadvertently creates a more rigid economic structure. The mechanism is a reversal of the labor pool. As populations age across the G7 and immigration restrictions tighten under the pressure of political populism, the surplus of cheap, offshore labor that once suppressed global inflation is gone. This pushes wage inflation to structural highs that central banks can no longer control with simple interest rate adjustments. This is compounded by technological diversification, the creation of splinter nets, and competing AI ecosystems that do not communicate with one another, leading to a loss of the network effects that previously drove productivity. When the US weaponizes the dollar through sanctions, it triggers a mechanical reaction where foreign central banks reduce their treasury holdings, leading to higher US sovereign interest rates and increased financial instability. The shock is transmitted through the redistribution of risk. Whereas risk was once spread globally, it is now being concentrated within national borders. This creates a state of resource nationalism, where nations hoard lithium, cobalt, and energy, turning the green transition from a collaborative global effort into a zero-sum competition for survival. The architecture of the Great Reversal ensures that every localized tremor becomes a structural crack, forcing a painful and expensive recalibration of what it means to be a stable economy. Global case studies serve as a laboratory for this unfolding fragmentation, providing a haunting preview of a world without a single rules-based trade system. In Russia, we see the most comprehensive sanctions regime in history, which has forced a total economic pivot toward Asia, creating a parallel financial order that operates entirely outside the reach of the Western banking system. This is the birth of the alternative payment system, where trade is settled in local currencies, directly challenging the hegemony of the US dollar. In Greece, the legacy of overdependence on integrated European finance led to a decade of austerity. But now, even within the Eurozone, we see the rise of energy nationalism as nations scramble to secure their own pipelines, shattering the dream of borderless energy. Turkey and Argentina serve as cautionary tales of what happens when a nation attempts to maintain global status without the productive capacity to support its currency, leading to a death spiral of exchange rate collapses and hyperinflation. Meanwhile, the US-China strategic decoupling is the most significant case study of all. Two economies that were once chimerica, a symbiotic pair, are now building digital and physical walls to protect their data and industrial bases. These real-world examples prove that the unwinding is not just about economics. It is about the militarization of finance. Whether it is India's push for self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, or the European Union's strategic autonomy, the shift is one clear. Governments are now prioritizing the fortress over the supermarket, leading to a world of high-cost workarounds and a permanent state of geo-economic friction that leaves the global consumer to foot the bill. Within the United States, the impact of the Great Reversal is felt as a profound industrial policy recovery. For 40 years, the US plain government operated under a free trade orthodoxy, assuming that market forces would naturally allocate resources to their most efficient use. That era is dead. Under the weight of the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, the state has returned as the primary driver of the economy, pumping hundreds of billions of dollars into domestic manufacturing, semiconductor plants, and green energy. This shift is a direct response to the strategic overstretch of the American system. which found itself unable to produce even basic medical supplies or high-end chips during recent global shocks. The impact on the individual is profound. While reshoring brings manufacturing jobs back to American soil, it does so at a much higher price point for the consumer. We are trading low prices for national security. This has led to a bifurcated labor market where high-tech industrial jobs flourish while the service-based middle class is squeezed by the rising costs of imported goods. The real estate market is being reshaped as new industrial hubs emerge in the heartland, while the coastal centers of global finance face a quiet stagnation. This is the internal unwinding, the realization that the American dream is no longer tied to the global consumer, but to the national fortress. The fiscal burden of this transition, combined with the massive debt accumulation required to fund it, is the greatest challenge of our time, leaving the average citizen to navigate an economy where the government is once again the most powerful player at the table, and resilience is the only metric that matters. Government and central bank responses have pivoted from managing growth to managing fragmentation. The Federal Reserve, once the global stabilizer of last resort, now finds itself caught between the need to fight structural inflation and the need to fund a massive, growing national debt. The response has been fiscal expansion on a scale not seen since World War II. To support the nationalization of supply chains, the government is using subsidies and friend-shoring policies to redirect trade toward political allies, effectively creating a bloc-based world order. However, this has led to a protectionist feedback loop. As the US imposes tariffs to protect its new industries, other nations retaliate, leading to the paralysis of the World Trade Organization and the erosion of international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. Central banks are increasingly looking at digital currencies as a way to maintain control over the monetary system in an era of de-dollarization pressures. The institutional erosion is complete. The IMF is being bypassed by parallel institutions like the BRICS Bank and the New Development Bank. The state is no longer a referee. It is a participant in the strategic competition. This creates a higher for longer interest rate environment as the world must now fund the green transition and the defense buildup simultaneously. In 2026, the focus of monetary policy has shifted from inflation targeting to currency stability, as the US looks to protect the dollar's value in an increasingly deglobalized environment. The era of easy money and cheap globalization has been permanently relegated to the history books, replaced by a macro reset where growth is moderate and the cost of capital is high. Personal survival in the age of the Great Reversal requires a total strategic pivot for the individual. The old advice of global diversification is being challenged by the reality of financial walls and technological bifurcation. To survive, one must adopt a strategy of national and local resilience. This means shifting your portfolio toward real assets, tangible commodities, domestic energy, and companies that are the beneficiaries of industrial policy and defense subsidies. Useful insight for the viewer: your purchasing power is now a geopolitical variable. You must prepare for a structurally higher cost of living by reducing non-essential consumption and investing in human capital that is relevant to the new reshored industrial economy. High-value technical skills in AI, robotics, and advanced manufacturing are the new gold standard for labor. Financial literacy now requires an understanding of geopolitics. You must be aware of how a sanction in Eurasia or a chip ban in Asia will hit your 401. Survival also involves localizing your personal supply chain, reducing your dependence on fragile, globalized systems. Whether it is through solar energy, local food networks, or high-value technical skills, the goal is to become anti-fragile. In an era of resource nationalism and de-dollarization, the winner is the one who is least dependent on the global grid. Resilience is the new wealth. Autonomy is the new security. By shortening your own personal supply chains and shoring up your domestic fortress, you insulate yourself from the tectonic shocks of a world that is pulling itself apart. You must operate as a system of continuity, reputation, and control, recognizing that in a fractured world, your ability to adapt is your only true asset. The remarkable closing message of this documentary is that the Great Reversal is not merely the end of a system, but the beginning of a sovereign rebirth. The hyper-globalization of the last 40 years was a beautiful, efficient, but ultimately brittle experiment. It prioritized the consumer over the citizen and efficiency over security. The reversal we see today is the painful correction of a world that lost its balance. While the transition is characterized by shocks, instability, and higher costs, it also offers the opportunity to rebuild a more human-scale and resilient economy. We are moving from a world where we were cogs in a global machine to a world where national purpose and local production once again matter. The lesson for the viewer is that while you cannot stop the unwinding of the global order, you can lead the rewinding of your own life. The fortress is not just about walls. It is about the integrity of our systems and the dignity of our work. As the era of frictionless trade ends, a new era of meaningful industry begins. The sun sets on a globalized dream that was too good to be true, and it rises on a world that is sober, realistic, and self-reliant. The Great Reversal is the price of our independence. And in the end, the resilience we build today will be the foundation of a more stable and sovereign tomorrow. Globalization is not dying. It is being re-regimented into blocks based on shared values rather than mere geography. The future belongs not to those who mourn the loss of the cheap past, but to those who embrace the resilience revolution and build a future that is built to last. As we dig deeper into the strategic overstretch of the American empire, we find that the Great Reversal is also a mirror reflecting our own domestic health. The cost of maintaining a global military commitment while attempting to re-industrialize the nation is creating a fiscal gravity that we can no longer ignore. The impact on a person's life is the realization that the government can no longer be a global stabilizer and a domestic provider at the same time. This is the choice of the century. Do we prioritize global hegemony or internal resilience? The demographic shift of an aging population is adding a layer of labor scarcity that makes the reversal even more difficult, as the pool of workers shrinks and the cost of care rises. The insight for the viewer is that we are moving into a high-friction world. Every interaction, from a bank transfer to an online purchase, will be scrutinized through the lens of data sovereignty and national security. This technological bifurcation means that the internet we knew is being replaced by walled gardens. The challenge of our time is to ensure that as the world reverses, we do not lose our connection to the values that made us civilization in the first place. The fortress should be a place of strength, not a prison of isolation. By understanding these mechanisms of fragmentation, we can navigate the cracks and find the new pathways to prosperity that exist in the spaces between the blocks. We must be able to let the government make some mistakes as it navigates this new world order, provided there is a mechanism to learn from them and protect the most vulnerable from the fallout of this massive macro reset. We conclude the Great Reversal with a vision of the new map. The world of 2026 is no longer a flat one. It is a world of peaks and valleys, of fortresses and corridors. We have seen how the industrial policy recovery, the nationalization of supply chains, and the weaponization of the dollar have created a systemic reset of the global order. The remarkable message is that while the super cycle of globalization has ended, the human capacity for adaptation is infinite. The signs of crisis were the birth pangs of a more realistic world. Your role in this transformation is to be informed, resilient, and proactive. The Great Reversal is a call to return to reality, to value the producer, to protect the resource, and to honor the sovereign. The documentary ends with the camera pulling back from the container ship to show the vast, beautiful diversity of a world that is no longer one, but many. The dream of a single market has been replaced by the reality of a diverse world, and in that diversity lies our greatest strength. The reversal is complete. The rebuilding has begun. The future belongs not to the globalist, but to the resilient citizen who knows that the best way to predict the future is to build it within their own borders, for their own people, and on their own terms. As we retrace these steps, we realize that little of what we do is unprecedented. We are simply returning to the fundamental economic truth that a nation's strength is found in its ability to provide for its own, even in the face of a world pulling itself apart.